It had been years since he'd had to visit a place like this in person. Most of his wealth was managed through intermediaries. But today something compelled him to handle the matter directly. The bright lights of the bank cast a sterile glow over the room, a stark contrast to the heavy thoughts weighing on Henry's mind. He approached the counter, handing his documents to the young woman sitting behind the glass. She looked up and smiled politely, no more than 25, with dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Her name tag read, Sarah. Henry nodded in acknowledgement, distracted as his eyes drifted down toward her neck. There, dangling delicately against her skin, was a small golden pendant, a familiar sight that froze Henry where he stood. His heart skipped a beat. The necklace she wore was identical to the one his daughter Sarah had on the day she disappeared. He hadn't seen that necklace in over 20 years, and yet here it was, worn by a stranger. His voice caught in his throat, but he forced himself to speak. "That's a beautiful necklace you're wearing," Henry said, his tone casual though his mind was spinning. "Where did you get it?" The young woman, who had been typing something into the computer, glanced down at the pendant, her fingers brushing over it absent-mindedly. "Oh, this? It was a gift from my grandmother. I've had it for as long as I can remember." Henry swallowed hard, keeping his expression neutral. A gift from her grandmother? Could it really just be a coincidence? But something about the situation felt too familiar, too real. "It's lovely," Henry said softly, his mind whirling. He could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him, the years he had spent searching for his daughter, the years of hope and disappointment. "It reminds me of a necklace my daughter had." The woman smiled politely, but there was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She handed Henry his documents, and their brief interaction was over. Henry walked out of the bank, but the image of that necklace burned in his mind. Outside, Henry stood on the steps, looking out at the busy city street. He knew it couldn't be a coincidence. That necklace had to be the one. But how? And more importantly, why? His daughter, Sarah, had disappeared when she was only 4 years old. 20 years had passed since that day, and not a single clue had surfaced. Until now. Henry had to know more about this young woman and her connection to the necklace that haunted his past. Back at home, Henry sat in his dimly lit study, staring blankly at the fire crackling in the hearth. The warmth of the flames did little to thaw the cold pit of anxiety forming in his stomach. The image of the necklace hanging around that young woman's neck played on an endless loop in his mind. He had spent the last 20 years searching for his daughter, and each day that passed without answers felt like a lifetime. Sarah had vanished without a trace on a seemingly normal day. One moment, she had been playing in the yard, and the next, she was gone. The police had conducted an extensive search. The media had plastered her face everywhere, but nothing had come of it. It was as though she had simply evaporated into thin air. The toll it took on Henry had been immeasurable. His marriage had crumbled under the weight of the tragedy. His wife had left him unable to bear the pain, and Henry had buried himself in his work, building his business empire to avoid confronting the hollow void Sarah's disappearance had left behind. Now, after all this time, a single necklace had reignited the spark of hope he had long tried to extinguish. But hope was dangerous. Hope had the power to pull a man to the brink of madness. Henry pulled open a drawer in his desk and took out the last photograph he had of Sarah, taken just a week before she disappeared. She had been so full of life, her blue eyes sparkling with joy as she smiled for the camera. In the photo, she wore the same necklace, its small pendant resting against her chest, a gift from her late grandmother. He had never forgotten that necklace. Henry clenched the photo in his hand. Could it be possible that the young woman at the bank was somehow connected to his daughter's disappearance? Or worse, was she wearing the necklace because she had been involved in taking Sarah? No, it didn't make sense. She would have been too young to be directly involved. But there was someone else in the picture, someone who had orchestrated the entire tragedy. And Henry had an idea of where to start looking. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Jacob Harper, his old friend and the private investigator who had once helped him search for Sarah, answered on the third ring. "Jacob, it's Henry," he said, his voice steady but laced with the tension of years of unresolved pain. "I think I've found something." "What is it, Henry?" Jacob's voice was calm, but there was a hint of concern. Henry took a deep breath. "I need your help again. It's about Sarah. I think I've found a clue. I need you to investigate someone for me." Jacob paused for a moment, and Henry could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "I'm on it. Send me the details." Hanging up the phone, Henry felt the weight of the years pressing down on him once more. He had spent so long chasing shadows, but now he might finally be close to the cab, but at what cost? The next morning, Henry was up early, pacing around his study, waiting for Jacob to get back to him. His mind was racing, filled with memories of Sarah and thoughts of the young woman from the bank. He couldn't let go of the feeling that there was something deeper going on. The necklace was too much of a coincidence, and the more he thought about it, the more determined he became to uncover the truth. By mid-morning, Jacob called. "Henry, I've started digging," Jacob said with "The girl's name is Sarah Davis, age 25, and she's been living in the city for the past 5 years. She has a clean record, no criminal background, but her history is a bit vague." Henry sat down, gripping the phone tightly. "What do you mean, vague?" "Well, there's not much on her before she turned 18. No clear school records or anything substantial. I dug into her family a bit. She was raised by her grandmother, but it looks like she moved around a lot as a kid. Her parents passed away when she was young, but there's something strange about the lack of details." Henry's heart raced. "And the necklace?" "I'm working on that," Jacob replied. "The grandmother is still alive. I'm planning on paying her a visit later today. Maybe she can shed some light on how the girl ended up with it." "Good," Henry said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let me know as soon as you have anything." After hanging up, Henry sat in silence, staring at the framed picture of his daughter on his desk. His mind wandered to the past, to the day Sarah had gone missing. He had replayed that day over and over in his mind for years. Everything had seemed so normal until it wasn't. One minute she had been playing outside, and the next she was gone. The police had scoured every inch of the neighborhood, interviewed everyone, but no one had seen a thing. It had been as if she had vanished into thin air. For years, Henry had blamed himself. He had been too focused on work, too distracted to keep an eye on her. Now, this new Sarah Davis was stirring up feelings he hadn't felt in a long time. Could it be possible that she was connected to his daughter? Or was this all just another false hope? As the day stretched on, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. He just didn't know how. Later that evening, Jacob called again. "Henry, I've just finished talking to Sarah's grandmother," Jacob said, his tone more serious than before. "I think we've got something." Henry straightened in his chair. "What did she say?" "Her name is Martha Davis, and she confirmed that she gave Sarah the necklace when she was a little girl," Jacob explained. "But it gets interesting. She said it wasn't hers originally. It was passed down from Sarah's mother." Henry's stomach dropped. "And Sarah's mother? What happened to her?" Jacob paused. "According to Martha, Sarah's mother, Rebecca, died when Sarah was just 4 years old. But here's the thing. Martha was hesitant to talk about it, and when I pressed her for more details, she got defensive. She said that Sarah's birth and the circumstances surrounding her early childhood were complicated. When I asked about Sarah's father, she refused to say much, only that he was out of the picture before Sarah was born." Henry felt a familiar knot of dread forming in his chest. "So there's no official record of her father?" "None that I could find," Jacob confirmed. "Martha seemed almost protective, like she was hiding something. But the fact that Sarah's mother died when she was the same age your daughter disappeared? It's more than a coincidence." Henry was silent for a moment, processing the information. The timeline was too close, the necklace too identical, and now the evasive answers about Sarah's parentage. It all pointed to something bigger, something more I need to meet this girl, Henry said firmly. I need to know if she's really my Sarah. Jacob sighed. I thought you'd say that. But Henry, we need to tread carefully. We can't just storm in with accusations. We don't know how much this girl knows or if she even has any connection to what happened to your daughter. Henry gripped the phone, frustration boiling inside him. Then what do you suggest? We need more proof, Jacob said calmly. I'm going to keep digging into the family's history. There's something Martha isn't telling us, and I have a feeling it's important. In the meantime, I'll see if we can get a DNA test without raising any suspicions. Henry nodded, though Jacob couldn't see him. Do what you have to do. After hanging up, Henry sat in silence, the weight of the past pressing heavily on his chest. He had spent so many years searching for Sarah, chasing shadows, and now he was on the brink of finding her. But the truth felt slippery, just out of reach. That night, Henry barely slept. His dreams were filled with images of Sarah, of the day she disappeared, of the necklace, and of the young woman who now haunted his waking thoughts. When morning came, he knew what he had to do. No matter what, he would get to the bottom of this. If Sarah Davis was his daughter, he would make sure she knew the truth. Henry couldn't wait any longer. The thought of the necklace, the resemblance, and the secrets surrounding Sarah Davis gnawed at him. He had to confront her to see if she knew more than she was letting on. Jacob was still gathering evidence, but Henry was a man of action. He needed to face her, to know in his heart if this woman was truly his daughter. The next day, he walked into the bank with a determined look on his face. His heart was pounding, but his steps were steady as he approached the counter where Sarah Davis was working. She looked up and smiled politely, the same kind smile as before. Good morning, Mr. Clarkson, she greeted him, not suspecting the storm brewing inside him. Morning, Henry replied, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. But then, the words tumbled out. Sarah, I'd like to speak with you. In private. Sarah blinked in surprise, her professional demeanor slipping slightly. Of course, she said after a beat, motioning for him to follow her into a small conference room. Once they were inside, she closed the door and faced him, her hands clasped in front of her. Is everything all right, Mr. Clarkson? Henry studied her face, her eyes, her mouth, her expression. He had been replaying this moment over and over in his mind, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. He could see the girl she might have been, but there was so much he didn't know. That necklace, Henry began, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. Where exactly did you get it? Sarah frowned, her hand instinctively going to the pendant around her neck. Like I told you before, it was a gift from my grandmother. She gave it to me when I was little. Henry took a deep breath, feeling his chest tighten. That necklace, he said, his voice breaking slightly, is identical to the one my daughter was wearing the day she disappeared. Sarah froze, her eyes widening. Your daughter? Her name was Sarah, too, Henry continued, his voice filled with emotion. She disappeared when she was 4 years old. We never found her. But that necklace, it's the same one she had. For a moment, there was only silence. Sarah stared at him, her face pale, her lips slightly parted in shock. Mr. Clarkson, I don't know what to say. This is a lot to take in. I need to know, Sarah, Henry pressed, his voice trembling with desperation. I need to know if you could be my daughter. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched the necklace. I don't know anything. My grandmother gave this to me, but she never told me where it came from. I never questioned it. Henry's heart sank, but he wasn't giving up. There's more to this than you realize. I've been investigating. There are too many coincidences. The timing, your background, the necklace, it all points to something. Sarah looked down, clearly overwhelmed. But I'm not your daughter. I can't be. Are you sure? Henry asked, his voice softer now. Do you remember anything from when you were younger? Anything about where you came from or your family? Sarah bit her lip, her brow furrowed in concentration. I don't remember much from when I was little. It's all blurry. My grandmother raised me and my mother died when I was very young. That's all I know. Henry's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, please. I've spent my entire life searching for my daughter. If there's even a chance that you're her, I need to know. Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes misting over. Mr. Clarkson, I don't have any answers for you. But if you think there's a possibility, then we should find out. Henry nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. We can take a DNA test. It's the only way to know for sure. Sarah swallowed hard, clearly torn between her emotions and the weight of the situation. After a long pause, she finally nodded. Okay, let's do it. The next few days were the longest of Henry's life. The DNA test had been taken, and now all they could do was wait for the EAR. Every minute felt like an eternity, and Henry found himself pacing his study, his thoughts consumed by the possibilities. Was Sarah truly his daughter? Could he finally have her back after all these years? Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own turmoil. The idea that her entire life could be built on a lie was overwhelming. She couldn't remember her mother, and her grandmother had always been vague about her early years. Now, everything she thought she knew was being called into question. When the results finally came in, Henry felt as though time had stopped. He opened the envelope with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah stood beside him, equally anxious, her face pale. The words on the page confirmed what Henry had both hoped for and feared. Sarah Davis was, in fact, his daughter, Sarah Clarkson. Henry's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. The weight of the revelation hit him like a tidal wave. His daughter, his little girl, was standing right in front of him. Sarah stared at the paper, her hand covering her mouth. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice shaking. This can't be real. It's real, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. You're my daughter. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she tried to process the truth. But what does this mean? My whole life. Everything I've known. Henry reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. It means we've found you. After all these years, we're finally together again. Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of shock, confusion, and a deep, overwhelming sadness. But I don't remember you, she whispered. I don't remember anything about us. Henry felt a sharp pang of sorrow, but he pushed it aside. That's okay, he said softly. We have time. We can make new memories. Sarah's tears began to flow freely now, and Henry pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried. It was a moment he had dreamed of for so long, but it was bittersweet. So many years had been lost and they would never get them back. But now, they had the future. As they stood there, holding on to each other, Henry knew that this was just the beginning. There were still so many questions that needed answers, so many things they needed to uncover about what had happened all those years ago. But for now, all that mattered was that they were together. The relief of knowing the truth about Sarah's identity was overwhelming, but it also opened the door to more painful questions. Henry knew that finding out what had happened the day she disappeared would be essential to understanding the full story. Why had Sarah been taken, and how had she ended up with the Davises? The day after the DNA results, Henry and Sarah sat together in his study. It was a quiet, somber moment, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. I need to know more about my past, Sarah said quietly. I need to know why this happened, why I was taken. I can't just accept that my whole life was built on a lie without understanding why. Henry nodded, knowing this moment would come. We'll find out together. I've already started looking into the Davises and the man who orchestrated all of this. There are still so many unanswered questions. As they sat there, Jacob called. He had been following leads on the mysterious man who had paid the Davises to take Sarah in. The news was unsettling. "Henry, I've got some information," Jacob said, his voice tense. "It looks like the man behind all of this was James Whitmore, an old business associate of yours." Henry's face went pale. He hadn't heard that name in years. "James Whitmore?" he repeated, incredulous. "What does he have to do with Sarah?" Jacob hesitated before answering. "It looks like he orchestrated her abduction as part of a personal vendetta. He blamed you for a deal that went south years ago, a deal that cost him everything. Whitmore wanted to hurt you where it would hurt the most." Henry's blood ran cold. The betrayal, the pain, it all crashed down on him. "He took my daughter because of a business deal?" "Looks that way," Jacob confirmed. "I'm still piecing it all together, but from what I can gather, he was trying to get revenge on you. The Davises were paid to take Sarah in and raise her, and Whitmore kept his distance to avoid suspicion." Henry clenched his fists, anger surging through him. How could a man be so cruel? How could someone destroy his life so completely over something as trivial as business? "I need to confront him," Henry said, his voice hard. "I need answers." Henry's heart pounded as he stood outside the mansion of James Whitmore. The house was cold and imposing, much like the man who lived there. Henry hadn't seen Whitmore in decades, not since the day their business partnership had fallen apart. Now, everything was clear. Whitmore had taken his daughter out of pure malice. Whitmore greeted him at the door with a smirk. "Henry Clarkson, I didn't expect to see you after all these years," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "What brings you here?" Henry's hands shook with barely suppressed rage. "You know why I'm here," he said through gritted teeth. "You took my daughter, Jay. You stole Sarah from me." Whitmore's expression didn't change. "You're finally putting the pieces together, huh?" His voice was calm, almost mocking. "Yes, I took her. You ruined my life, Henry. I lost everything because of you, so I figured I'd return the favor." Henry's fists clenched. This wasn't about money or business. This was about my child, my family. You destroyed our lives. "And you destroyed mine," Whitmore shot back, his eyes flashing with anger. "You left me with nothing. You took everything I built, everything I cared about. I wanted you to feel the same emptiness." Henry took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "I've lived in hell for the past 20 years, wondering where my daughter was, wondering if she was dead. But now I've found her. I've found Sarah, and I know the truth." For the first time, Whitmore's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected Henry to get this far. "So what now, Henry? You're here for revenge?" Henry shook his head, his voice steady. "I'm here for answers. I need to know why you did this, why you thought it was worth tearing a family apart." Whitmore was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more subdued. "I lost everything, Henry. My family, my fortune, my reputation. It was all gone because of that deal. You came out on top, and I was left with nothing. Taking Sarah was the only way I could make you feel the same loss." Henry stared at him, disgusted. "You think taking my daughter made us? You think that balances the scales?" Whitmore didn't answer, his eyes dropping to the floor. Henry's voice was filled with quiet fury. "You'll answer for what you did, James. I don't care how long it takes. I'll make sure you pay for taking her from me." With that, Henry turned and walked away, his heart heavy but resolved. He had faced the man who had stolen his daughter, and now he could finally begin to heal. In the days that followed, the weight of the confrontation with Whitmore lingered. Henry knew that the legal process to hold him accountable would take time, but for now, his focus was on rebuilding his relationship with Sarah. She had been through so much, and now that the truth was out, they both had to navigate a new reality. Sarah was struggling to come to terms with everything. She had been raised by people she thought were her family, but now, Her entire identity felt like a lie. Henry tried to be there for her, to give her space to process, but it was hard. He wanted so desperately to make up for lost time, to show her that she was loved. One afternoon, as they sat together in Henry's garden, Sarah finally spoke up. "It's strange," she said quietly. "All these years, I felt like something was missing. I didn't know what it was, but I always felt incomplete. Now I understand why." Henry looked at her, his heart aching for the pain she had endured. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have found you sooner. I should have done more." Sarah shook her head. "It's not your fault, Dad. You couldn't have known. Whitmore, he took everything from us. But now, we have a chance to move forward." Hearing her call him Dad filled Henry with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "I want to make things right," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I want to give you the life you deserve." Sarah smiled softly. "We'll figure it out. It's going to take time, but we'll get there." Months passed, and slowly but surely, Henry and Sarah began to rebuild It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of sadness for the years they had lost, but there was also hope. They spent time together, getting to know each other in ways they had never had the chance to before. Whitmore faced justice for his actions, and while it didn't erase the pain he had caused, it gave Henry a sense of closure. The man who had torn his life apart was no longer a threat, and now Henry could focus on what truly mattered: his daughter. On a bright spring morning, Henry and Sarah sat together on the porch of his estate, the sun casting a warm glow over the garden. "I never imagined we'd be here," Henry said, smiling at Sarah. "But I'm so grateful we are." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with emotion. "Me too. It's not what I expected, but it's good. We're good." Henry reached over and took her hand. "We can't change the past, but we have the future. And I promise you, Sarah, I'll always be here for you." As they sat there, father and daughter, Henry felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but now they had a new beginning. A chance to heal, to grow, and to be a family once more. If you loved this heartwarming and suspenseful story of a millionaire's quest to find his long-lost daughter, click on the card above to watch more incredible stories just like this. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. I absolutely love reading your thoughts, and your feedback inspires me to keep creating these amazing stories.